Case 1. Michael Valva. Center Moriches, Long Island, New York, January 2020. In the early hours of January 17, 2020, emergency responders received a 911 call from a residence in Center Moriches on Long Island, New York. The caller was Michael Valva, a 45-year-old former officer with the New York City Police Department. His account of the emergency was this. His 8-year-old son Thomas had fallen on his way to the school bus, banged his head, and lost consciousness. Valva told the dispatcher he was performing CPR. When paramedics arrived and found Thomas Valva, the child's body temperature was 76.1 degrees Fahrenheit. Normal human body temperature is 98.6 degrees. Thomas was not a victim of a fall. He was a victim of severe hypothermia, a condition that develops when the body's core temperature drops to levels it cannot sustain. His small body had been cold for a long time. He was pronounced dead at the hospital. The investigation that followed the death of Thomas Valva produced evidence that changed the character of the story from a tragedy to something else entirely. Michael Valva lived in the house with his 3 sons and his fiancée Angela Polina and her 3 daughters. 2 of Valva's sons, Thomas and his brother Anthony, had both been diagnosed with autism. This fact is directly relevant to what investigators found, because it speaks to the specific vulnerability of the children who were being abused. Home surveillance footage recovered by investigators, footage recorded inside the Valva residence, documented what Thomas and Anthony had been subjected to over an extended period. The 2 boys had been forced to sleep in the family's unheated garage, not occasionally, consistently, without heat, without access to a bathroom, without a mattress, without blankets. On the night before Thomas died, the temperature outside dropped below freezing. Thomas and Anthony spent that night on the cold cement floor of the garage. The following morning, Thomas had an accident and soiled his pants. The surveillance footage recorded what happened next. Valva arrived at the garage, screamed at Thomas, forced him outside, and sprayed him down with cold water from a hose. Thomas collapsed. Valva waited more than an hour before calling 911. School officials who testified at trial described a pattern that tracked what the surveillance footage confirmed. Thomas and Anthony arrived at school almost every day hungry, often cold, sometimes in soiled clothing. They were observed searching for food, scavenging, in the specific word used in testimony. Their teachers and school staff had noticed something wrong for a long time. The prosecution did not frame what happened to Thomas Valva as a single terrible decision. They framed it as a sustained pattern of abuse, deliberate, extended, and fatal in its culmination. Valva's defense attempted to lean on his law enforcement background as character evidence. The prosecution responded by emphasizing that law enforcement background, the fact that Valva knew the systems designed to catch child abuse, understood how they worked, and had operated inside them professionally, made the sustained concealment of the abuse more deliberate, not less. Angela Polina was charged and tried alongside Valva. In December 2022, Michael Valva was convicted on all counts, second-degree murder, and multiple counts of endangering the welfare of a child. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Angela Polina received the same sentence. The Suffolk County District Attorney described the treatment of Thomas and Anthony as nothing short of evil. As of April 2025, Valva has served approximately 2 years and 4 months of his sentence. He is incarcerated at a New York State correctional facility. His earliest possible parole consideration would be in 2047, when he would be 68 years old. Thomas Valva was 8 years old. He was autistic, which meant he had limited ability to communicate his suffering to the outside world in the ways that might have triggered faster intervention. He died on a cold January morning from hypothermia, after a night on a cement floor, in a garage, with no heat and no blankets. He was the son of a police officer. Before we get into the second case, welcome to Daily Crime Archive. This channel covers the cases that deserve more than a headline and a 2-sentence summary. We go deep: the investigation, the trial, the systemic context, victim stories, and the questions that the justice system sometimes answers and sometimes doesn't. We don't sensationalize. We don't editorialize beyond the facts. We just cover the cases properly, because the people affected by them deserve that. We are a new channel, and every single subscriber helps us reach more people. If you're watching this and you haven't subscribed yet, hit the button and turn on the bell right now. Drop a comment as you're watching. Tell us which of these cases you followed when they happened. We read every one. Now, Case 2. Case 2. Daniel Holtzclaw. Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. December 2013 to June 2014. On the morning of June 18, 2014, a 57-year-old woman named Janie Liggins was driving home after a full day of work in northeast Oklahoma City. She was stopped by a marked police vehicle. The officer who pulled her over was Daniel Holtzclaw, 27 years old, who had just ended his shift and was driving home in his patrol car. What Holtzclaw did after stopping Janie Liggins, the details she reported at the police station directly after the encounter, forms the beginning of an investigation that would ultimately involve 16 women and a criminal case with 36 counts. Before the assault, while it was occurring, Liggins made a calculation that speaks directly to the specific terror of what was being done to her. She tried not to look at his badge. She told investigators that she was afraid that if she learned his name, he might kill her to prevent her from reporting him. She went to the police station anyway. The next day, when Holtzclaw returned to work, he was questioned by detectives Kim Davis and Rocky Gregory. He denied everything. DNA swabs were taken. His police equipment was confiscated. He was placed on paid administrative leave and released, because at that point, there was no confirmed evidence beyond Liggins' account. The investigation that followed Liggins' report did not just look forward. It looked back. Detectives pulled records for the northeast sector of Oklahoma City that Holtzclaw had been patrolling, a section of the city with a predominantly African-American population. They began looking at his patrol logs, his traffic stop records, and any prior complaints. What they found was a method so systematic that it had the structure of a deliberate operational approach. Holtzclaw had been running background checks on women he stopped. He was selecting victims based on their records, specifically targeting women who had prior arrests, who were dealing with substance use issues, who existed in circumstances that would make them less likely, he calculated, to be believed if they reported him. He used the threat of arrest, the reminder of their criminal histories, and the physical authority of his uniform to coerce women into sexual acts. In at least one instance, he assaulted a woman while she was handcuffed in a hospital after an arrest. His victims ranged in age from 17 to 57. 13 women came forward during the investigation. Holtzclaw had joined the Oklahoma City Police Department after a college football career, a background that had generated significant public interest in the case and had been assigned to a patrol sector he appears to have treated as a hunting ground. The trial began in November 2015 and lasted a month. Witnesses included multiple victims who described, in direct testimony, what Holtzclaw had done to them. One described being handcuffed in a hospital room. Another described being threatened with arrest. Each account reinforced the pattern investigators had documented. Holtzclaw did not testify. In December 2015, the jury, which included 8 men and 4 women, convicted him on 18 of 36 counts, including 4 counts of first-degree rape, battery, and forcible oral sodomy. The jury recommended a sentence of 263 years. On January 21, 2016, Judge Timothy Henderson sentenced Daniel Holtzclaw to 263 years in prison, effectively a sentence designed to ensure he never left. His appeals have been consistently denied. In 2019, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals upheld his convictions and sentence in full. His family has indicated plans to pursue federal appeals, a process that could extend for years without changing the practical outcome. As of April 2025, Holtzclaw has served approximately 9 years of his sentence. He is incarcerated at the Lexington Assessment and Reception Center in Oklahoma. The Holtzclaw case is, in its structural dimensions, a precise illustration of how a police uniform can be used as an instrument of predatory targeting. He chose his victims based on their vulnerability to his specific kind of coercion. He chose a patrol area that he appears to have assessed as one where his victims would have the least institutional recourse. He relied, correctly for an extended period, on the calculation that marginalized women with criminal records would not be believed when they reported a uniformed officer. Janie Liggins believed it too, and she reported him anyway. Case 3. Bobby Lee Cutts, Jr., Lake Township, Ohio, June 2007. On June 14, 2007, Jessie Marie Davis, 26 years old and 9 months pregnant, vanished from her home in Lake Township, Ohio. Her mother, who had been unable to reach her by phone, came to the house the following day and found Jessie's 2-year-old son Blake alone inside. The home showed signs of a struggle: overturned furniture, bleach stains on the floor, and what appeared to be an attempt to clean something up. Blake, still a toddler, told his grandmother that his mommy had broken the table and that his mommy was inside the rug. The community response to Jessie's disappearance was extensive. Volunteer search groups, including members of Texas EquiSearch, combed the area. The search generated significant local and national media coverage. The investigation's focus fell quickly on Bobby Lee Cutts, Jr., a 26-year-old Canton Police Department officer. Cutts was the father of Blake and the father of the unborn child Jessie was carrying, a daughter she had already planned to name Chloe. Initially, Cutts denied involvement. He claimed no knowledge of where Jessie was. On June 23, 2007, 9 days after Jessie disappeared, Cutts led investigators to her body in a wooded area of Hampton Hills Metro Park. She had been wrapped in a comforter and left in the park. He was arrested and charged with the murders of Jessie Davis and her unborn daughter Chloe. At trial, which began on February 4, 2008, Cutts testified in his own defense. His account was that Jessie's death had been accidental, that during an argument, he had elbowed her in the throat, that she had fallen and stopped breathing, and that he had panicked. He admitted he had not called for help. Instead, he had contacted a friend named Maisha Farrell, who helped him move and dispose of Jessie's body. The prosecution's characterization was different. They presented evidence that this was not an accident followed by panic, that the disposal of Jessie's body, the cleaning of the crime scene, and the use of an accomplice indicated deliberate intent to conceal a homicide. On February 15, 2008, the jury found Cutts guilty of the aggravated murder of Chloe, the unborn child, the murder of Jessie Davis, aggravated burglary, gross abuse of a corpse, and child endangerment. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Maisha Farrell, who had helped him dispose of Jessie's body, pleaded guilty to obstruction of justice and complicity to gross abuse of a corpse. She was sentenced to 2 years. As of April 2025, Bobby Lee Cutts, Jr. has served approximately 17 years of his life sentence. He is incarcerated at the Marion Correctional Institution in Ohio. Jessie Davis was 9 months pregnant. Chloe, the name Jessie had already chosen, was 8 days from a due date she never reached. Their 2-year-old son Blake spent the night alone in the house where his mother had been killed. Case 4. Matthew Kinne, Oxford, Mississippi, May 2019. On May 19, 2019, 40-year-old Matthew Kinne, a former officer with the Oxford Police Department in Mississippi, drove his marked patrol car, off-duty, to the home of 32-year-old Dominique Clayton. He entered through an unlocked door. He found Clayton asleep. He went back to his vehicle to retrieve his department-issued 9mm Glock. He returned. He shot her once in the back of the head. After the killing, Kinne drove to the Oxford Police Department's horse barn, a location he was familiar with as a department officer, and left his phone there. This was a deliberate attempt to create an alibi. The phone's location data would show him at the barn, not at Clayton's home, during the time of the murder. He also sent Clayton a text message from his phone shortly after the shooting, designed to make it appear she was still alive when he messaged her. Clayton's 8-year-old son discovered his mother's body the following morning. Investigators identified Kinne as a suspect quickly, based on the documented history of their relationship. He was a married officer. Clayton had been his affair partner. The relationship had apparently reached the point where Clayton represented a threat to Kinne's marriage and career, either because she was considering ending the relationship or because she had information that could expose him. Surveillance footage placed Kinne near the scene. When that evidence was presented to him during interrogation, he confessed. His account of the motive confirmed what investigators had suspected. He had wanted to end the relationship, but believed Clayton would tell his wife. The victim's family disputed this framing. They believed it was Clayton who had been trying to end the relationship, and that Kinne's response to her attempting to leave was to kill her. Whatever the precise dynamic, the outcome was the same. Kinne drove to her home. He retrieved his service weapon. He shot her while she slept. In August 2019, Kinne was indicted on capital murder charges that could have resulted in a death sentence. To avoid that outcome, he pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. A federal judge subsequently awarded $2.2 million in damages to Dominique Clayton's 4 children, $1.2 million in compensatory damages for the loss of their mother, and $1 million in punitive damages reflecting the intentional, willful, and reckless nature of Kinne's actions. As of April 2025, Kinne has served approximately 5 years and 11 months of his life sentence. He is incarcerated at a Mississippi State Correctional Facility. Clayton's 4 children grew up without their mother because a man with a department-issued firearm and knowledge of law enforcement investigative techniques decided to use both to conceal a murder. The $2.2 million judgment cannot change that. Case 5. Wayne Couzens, London, England, March 2021. On the evening of March 3, 2021, Sarah Everard, 33 years old, left a friend's house in Clapham, South London, and began the walk to her home in Brixton Hill. It was a route she knew. She was on the phone with her boyfriend for approximately 15 minutes as she walked. She described where she was. She told him she would see him the next day. A police dash camera recorded her movements on Pointers Road at approximately 9 p.m. Shortly after that recording, she was stopped by Wayne Couzens, a 49-year-old serving Metropolitan Police officer who had finished his shift earlier that day and was driving a rental vehicle. Couzens showed Sarah Everard his police warrant card. According to the investigation's findings, he told her she was being arrested for breaching COVID-19 lockdown guidelines, a false arrest, executed using the legal authority of his police credentials. He handcuffed her. CCTV cameras recorded him placing her in his vehicle and driving toward Kent. What followed, documented through an extensive forensic and surveillance investigation, was methodical and premeditated. Couzens drove Sarah to a location in Dover. He transferred her to his personal vehicle. Around midnight, in a secluded area, he assaulted and strangled her using his police duty belt. After the killing, he drove to a petrol station and purchased fuel and supplies. He went to a plot of private land he owned in Hodes Wood, where he concealed Sarah's body. He returned the rental car. He disposed of her phone and her personal belongings. Days after the murder, in what investigators concluded was an attempt to obscure evidence, he returned to Hodes Wood, burned Sarah's remains, placed them in bags, and disposed of them. He also took steps, in the days following the murder, to create the impression of illness, telling colleagues he was suffering from stress and would need to surrender his firearm. He handed in his police equipment, including his belt and handcuffs. The investigation that followed Sarah's disappearance was one of the largest in the Metropolitan Police's recent history. Her remains were discovered in a wooded area near Ashford, Kent. The evidence trail led to Couzens. The inquiry that followed, led by Dame Elish Angiolini, found that Couzens had a documented history of indecent exposure incidents that predated Sarah's murder. He had been reported for indecent exposure just days before the killing. No meaningful action had been taken. The inquiry found that these missed opportunities had allowed Couzens to continue escalating his predatory behavior without intervention. On September 30, 2021, Wayne Couzens was sentenced to a whole life term, the most severe sentence available in the English legal system, meaning he will die in prison without any possibility of parole. The judge described the crime as, quote, devastating, tragic, and wholly brutal. In addition to the whole life term, Couzens was sentenced to 19 months for 3 separate counts of indecent exposure to run concurrently. As of April 2025, Couzens has served approximately 3.5 years of his sentence at HMP Frankland, a high-security prison in County Durham. Sarah Everard's case reshaped public discourse in the United Kingdom about the safety of women in public spaces, and about institutional failures in police vetting and misconduct investigation. The vigil held in her memory on Clapham Common, attended by thousands of women, was itself met with a police response that generated additional controversy and public anger. The Angiolini inquiry's findings about the missed opportunities to identify Couzens as a danger before Sarah's murder produced formal recommendations for reform of how the Metropolitan Police handles complaints against officers. Sarah Everard was walking home. She was on the phone. She was in a well-lit, familiar area. She did everything right. She was killed because a serving police officer decided to use his warrant card as a tool of abduction. 5 cases in. We are covering 18 today, and I want to take a moment. This is the kind of content that takes time to research and time to watch. If you're here, you're watching because you believe these stories deserve more than a 60-second news segment. So do we. Daily Crime Archive is a new channel. Your subscription, right now if you haven't yet, directly affects how YouTube's algorithm recommends this content to more people. Hit the button and the bell. Drop a comment. Tell us which of these cases you followed when it was happening. Tell us which one we're covering in a way you haven't heard before. 13 more cases. Let's continue. Case 6. David Carrick, Metropolitan Police, England, 2003 to 2020. David Carrick served as a Metropolitan Police officer for over 20 years. During that time, he was assigned to the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command, a unit responsible for guarding Parliament and diplomatic premises. He carried a firearm. He was trusted with some of the most sensitive protective duties in British law enforcement. During those same 20 years, Carrick committed at least 85 serious offenses against women. 48 of those offenses were sexual assaults. The crime spanned from 2003 to 2020. He came to the attention of police over 9 separate incidents between 2000 and 2022. None of those complaints resulted in meaningful action. He was not removed from the force. He was not investigated in a way that connected the pattern of behavior. In 2016, following a mishandled complaint, he was re-vetted by the Metropolitan Police and cleared to continue serving, at which point investigators later found he escalated his offenses. The method Carrick used to find and control his victims had a consistent architecture. He met many of them through dating apps, presenting himself as a trustworthy professional. Once relationships began, he used his status as a police officer, explicitly and repeatedly, to manipulate and silence his victims. He controlled what they wore, what they ate, who they were allowed to communicate with. He isolated them. He subjected them to physical and sexual violence in his Hertfordshire home. Some victims were locked in a cupboard under the stairs. Others were subjected to assaults involving a firearm held to their heads. The range and duration of the abuse he inflicted on individual victims, some of whom he maintained long-term coercive relationships with, was documented in detail through the testimony of 12 women. He used the police uniform and the implicit threat it represented, the threat that no one would believe a victim's word against a serving officers, as a tool of control after every assault. For 17 years, that calculation was correct. In 2021, a woman came forward with new allegations. The subsequent investigation opened the full historical scope of his offending. By the time the case reached a courtroom, 12 women had come forward. In February 2023, Carrick pleaded guilty to 49 charges across all 12 victims. He showed no emotion in court throughout the proceedings. He was sentenced to 36 life sentences. The judge ordered him to serve a minimum of 30 years before any parole consideration, meaning he will not be eligible until he is at least 76 years old. As of April 2025, Carrick has served approximately 2 years of his sentence and is incarcerated at a UK high-security prison. The Metropolitan Police Commissioner publicly acknowledged that the force had failed to identify Carrick as a danger, despite the 9 prior incidents on record. The case was one of several high-profile failures, alongside the Wayne Couzens case, that triggered widespread review of Metropolitan Police vetting, misconduct investigation procedures, and the culture that allowed serial offenders to remain on the force for decades. Case 7. Nicholas Tartaglione, Orange County, New York, April 2016. Nicholas Tartaglione had been a police officer in Briarcliff Manor, New York. before leaving law enforcement and becoming involved in businesses that investigators would later describe as covers for narcotics dealing. By April 2016, Tartaglione was involved in a dispute over approximately $250,000 related to what the prosecution described as a drug purchase. He believed a man named Martin Luna had stolen the money. He decided to address the dispute in the most extreme way available to him. He set up a meeting. The location was the Liquid Lounge, a bar in Chester, New York, owned by Tartaglione's brother. Martin Luna arrived at the meeting, unaware that it was a trap. He brought his nephews, Miguel Luna and another young man, along with his niece's husband, Urbano Santiago, and a family friend, Hector Gutierrez. 4 men. None of them knew what was waiting. Tartaglione and his associates kidnapped all 4 men at the bar. Martin Luna was transported to Tartaglione's property in Otisville. He was physically restrained and beaten for over an hour. He was then murdered with a zip tie, a killing that took time and required his 3 companions to watch. After Martin Luna was dead, the other 3 men were executed with single gunshots to the backs of their heads. All 4 bodies were buried in a shallow grave on Tartaglione's rented property. The 4 men simply disappeared. There was no immediate scene, no immediate evidence, no one who had witnessed what happened and was willing to speak immediately. The case went cold. In December 2016, the FBI's Hudson Valley Safe Streets Task Force, pursuing a separate investigation, found the mass grave on Tartaglione's property. 4 sets of human remains, buried together. Tartaglione was arrested. In a development that added another layer to the case's subsequent history, he was briefly held in the same federal detention facility as Jeffrey Epstein in 2019. He was considered a significant witness in the investigation into Epstein's death, though he was not in the cell at the time. He maintained his innocence throughout the proceedings, claiming he was simply a businessman who ran an animal rescue farm and had no knowledge of the killings. The jury did not believe him. In April 2023, Tartaglione was convicted of 4 counts of murder, kidnapping resulting in death, kidnapping conspiracy, and narcotics conspiracy. In June 2024, he was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. One of his co-conspirators, Joseph Biggs, testified against him and was sentenced to 16 years after pleading guilty. As of April 2025, Tartaglione has served approximately 10 months of his sentence. He is incarcerated in a federal prison. Case 8. Henry Solis, Pomona, California, March 2015. On the evening of March 13, 2015, a fight broke out between 23-year-old Salome Rodriguez Jr. and 27-year-old Henry Solis, a probationary Los Angeles Police Department officer who was off duty at the time. The altercation began outside a bar in Pomona, east of Los Angeles. As it escalated, Rodriguez ran. Solis pursued him and shot him multiple times. Rodriguez died at the scene. Within hours of the shooting, Solis had left the country. His father drove him to the U.S.-Mexico border. CCTV cameras at the border captured both of them crossing on foot. The LAPD fired Solis during his absence. He was placed on the FBI's most wanted list. A manhunt was conducted. In May 2015, 2 months after the shooting, Solis was apprehended in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, where he had been staying with relatives. He was extradited to the United States. At trial, Solis's defense argued self-defense, that Rodriguez had posed a threat, and that Solis had acted to protect himself. Prosecutors countered with the evidence that Rodriguez had been running away from the encounter when he was shot, that Solis had pursued him, and that the shooting of a fleeing man could not be characterized as self-defense. The flight across the border, prosecutors noted, was not the behavior of someone who believed they had acted lawfully. Solis was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 40 years to life in prison. His father, Victor Solis, was separately convicted by a federal jury in El Paso of lying to the FBI about his role in helping his son escape. He was sentenced to 3 years of probation and a $1,000 fine. As of April 2025, Henry Solis has served approximately 9 years of his sentence and is incarcerated in a California state prison. Case 9. Michael Nealey, Pensacola Beach, Florida, November 2019. In November 2019, Michael Nealey, a 50-year-old officer with the Manford Police Department in Oklahoma, traveled to Pensacola Beach, Florida with his superior, Police Chief Lucky Miller, to attend a law enforcement conference. They were sharing a hotel room at the Hilton Pensacola Beach. On the evening of November 10, 2019, other hotel guests reported loud noises coming from their room. A maintenance worker responding to noise complaints entered and found Nealey on top of Miller, who was motionless on the floor. When deputies arrived and pulled Nealey off, Miller had no pulse. He showed visible signs of a severe beating. He had a swollen right eye. He was not breathing. Miller was pronounced dead. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head and asphyxiation by strangulation and smothering. Prosecutors presented evidence that at least one of the blows Nealey delivered had the force equivalent of a car accident. At trial in Escambia County, Florida, Nealey's defense offered an account that required the jury to accept a specific set of claims simultaneously. That Nealey had been so profoundly intoxicated that he had accidentally fallen on Miller, and that he had been physically unable to get off due to his drunken state. The jury heard the medical examiner's testimony about the force involved. They heard the account of the maintenance worker who found the scene. They heard the testimony of responding deputies about what they observed when they entered the room. Nealey declined to testify in his own defense. In March 2021, the jury found him guilty of second-degree murder. On April 29, 2021, he was sentenced to life in prison, with credit for the 536 days he had already served. The motive behind the altercation was never definitively established. Both men were known within their department as friendly and mutually respected colleagues. As of April 2025, Nealey has served approximately 5 years and 5 months of his sentence. Case 10. Miles Bryant, Norcross and Doraville, Georgia, July 2022. On the evening of July 26, 2022, 16-year-old Susanna Morales told her mother she was walking home from a friend's house in Norcross, Georgia. She never arrived. For 6 months, she was missing. Missing person posters were distributed. Her family waited. Law enforcement investigated. In January 2023, a man named Matthew Gilbert was off-roading in a wooded area near Doraville, approximately 20 miles from where Susanna had last been seen, when he discovered skeletal remains. Dental records and DNA testing confirmed they were Susanna. The medical examination suggested she had been killed on the same night she disappeared. The condition of the remains made the cause of death impossible to determine definitively, but investigators noted the likelihood that she had been incapacitated, possibly drugged, before whatever happened to her. Miles Bryant was a 22-year-old former Doraville Police Department officer who lived near the road Susanna would have taken walking home. The investigation identified him as a suspect, and he was arrested on suspicion of abduction and murder. He was denied bail. The judge stated he posed a danger to the community. He was subsequently fired from the police department. The evidence presented at trial included several elements that, combined, formed a damning picture. Bryant's mobile devices contained internet searches that he had conducted in the period after Susanna's disappearance. Among the searches, how long it takes for a body to decompose, how remains can be identified through dental records. These were not searches connected to any professional law enforcement purpose. He was no longer employed as an officer when some of them were made. A firearm registered to Bryant was recovered near Susanna's remains. Bryant had reported this weapon stolen shortly after her disappearance. His former cellmate testified that Bryant had told him, while they were incarcerated together, that he would not be charged because investigators had nothing physical to link him to the murder. No blood, no biological fluid. His longtime friend testified that, months after Susanna's disappearance, Bryant had been documented on camera stalking her. At sentencing, as Susanna's family read their impact statements with tears, Bryant offered an apology that amounted to 4 words: "I'm sorry to everybody." The jury found him guilty of malice murder, felony murder, kidnapping, and filing a false report of a crime. He was acquitted on the attempted assault charge. The presiding judge sentenced Bryant to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 12 months for the false report. As of April 2025, Bryant has served approximately 10 months of his sentence. He is incarcerated at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification State Prison in Jackson, Georgia. Case 11. Kenneth Blue. Buena Vista Township, Michigan, August 2011. On the evening of August 30, 2011, Jennifer Webb, a 32-year-old woman who was 8 months pregnant, was found dead in her car near a drainage ditch in Buena Vista Township, Michigan. The scene had been staged. Webb's body was positioned to suggest she had died by self-inflicted hanging, with an extension cord tied to the roof rack of her vehicle. Her body was found hanging from it. Forensic analysis of the scene and the body dismantled that staging within hours of the discovery. The cause of death was manual strangulation, not hanging. The staging had been constructed after she was already dead. The investigation focused quickly on 37-year-old Kenneth Blue, an officer with the Buena Vista Township Police Department, and the father of the child Webb was carrying. Blue was a married man. The relationship between him and Webb was one he had been concealing from his wife, from the department, and from the community. The prosecution's theory of the crime was direct. Blue had murdered Jennifer Webb to prevent the relationship, and his impending paternity, from becoming known. The pregnancy represented an exposure he had decided to eliminate rather than face. The evidence against him was substantial. DNA and fingerprints placed him at the scene. His behavior in the days following the discovery of Webb's body raised significant investigative concerns. The staged scene bore signs of someone with knowledge of how crime scenes are examined, someone who understood what investigators look for, and attempted to redirect that investigation toward a conclusion that would close the case without scrutiny. He had miscalculated the forensic analysis. In November 2012, Blue was convicted of first-degree premeditated murder, assault of a pregnant individual with intent to cause miscarriage, and 2 counts of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony. His wife, who had been unaware of the relationship with Webb throughout, filed for divorce during the trial. At sentencing, Webb's mother addressed Blue directly, telling him that his actions had broken the trust of everyone who had once believed in him, and that what he had done would haunt him for the rest of his life. Blue was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the murder conviction, 65 to 100 years for the assault conviction, and 2 years for each firearms conviction, all to run concurrently. As of April 2025, Kenneth Blue has served approximately 12 years of his sentence. He is incarcerated at the Alger Correctional Facility in Munising, Michigan. 11 cases down. 7 more to go. We're covering cases today that span a full range of how this specific kind of betrayal plays out, from individual officers who used their badge to target victims, to cases that raise broader questions about institutional failures that allowed misconduct to go unaddressed for years. If you're watching this on Daily Crime Archive and you haven't subscribed yet, now is the time. Every subscribe, every bell notification, every comment helps this channel grow and reach more people. And if you have a case you think we should cover, drop it in the comments. The community shapes what comes next. 7 more. Let's finish this. Case 12. Aaron Dean. Fort Worth, Texas, October 2019. Atatiana Jefferson was 28 years old. She was a pre-med graduate of Xavier University in New Orleans, a woman described by those who knew her as intellectually driven and deeply compassionate. She had moved back to Fort Worth to care for her ailing mother and was actively involved in her community. On the night of October 12, 2019, she was at home in Fort Worth with her 8-year-old nephew Zion. They had been playing video games. They had left the front door open to air out smoke from burnt food on the stove. A neighbor, noticing the open door at an unusual hour, called a non-emergency police line to request a welfare check. The intent was thoughtful, someone making sure their neighbor was okay. At around 2:30 a.m., 2 officers responded. One was Aaron Dean, 34 years old, who had joined the Fort Worth Police Department 6 months earlier. He and his partner approached the residence without announcing themselves as police. They entered the backyard. Through a window, Dean observed movement inside the house. He shouted for Jefferson to show her hands. Within seconds, he fired a single shot through the window. Atatiana Jefferson had heard movement outside her home in the middle of the night. She had retrieved her legally owned firearm from her purse. the reasonable response of a person who believed there might be an intruder outside her window. Her nephew Zion later testified that she was walking to the window, holding the gun at her side, when she was shot. She died at the scene. Zion witnessed everything. The body camera footage released by the department showed the sequence of events, the approach without announcement, the shout, the almost simultaneous shot. The footage generated immediate public outcry. 2 days after the shooting, Dean resigned from the Fort Worth Police Department, preemptively, before the department could terminate him, and just before his arrest on a murder charge. He was released on a $200,000 bond. The trial, delayed repeatedly by legal proceedings and the COVID-19 pandemic, finally began in December 2022. The prosecution argued that Dean had acted recklessly, that his failure to identify himself as a police officer, combined with the near-instantaneous use of lethal force, fell catastrophically short of any standard of reasonable police conduct. Jefferson had no way of knowing the person outside her window was a police officer. She had never been told. The welfare check intended to ensure her safety had become the source of her death. The defense argued Dean had perceived a threat in the firearm and had acted in what he believed was self-defense. The jury found him guilty of manslaughter, a lesser charge than murder, reflecting a finding of negligence rather than deliberate intent. The verdict was seen by some as insufficient, and by others as the appropriate legal category for the specific circumstances. On December 20, 2022, Dean was sentenced to 11 years, 10 months and 12 days in prison. The length of the sentence was deliberate. It matched the age of Zion, the nephew who had witnessed the killing, and the date on which it occurred. As of April 2025, Dean has served approximately 2 years and 4 months. He is incarcerated in a Texas state prison and may be eligible for parole after serving half his sentence, around mid-2028. Case 13, Roy Oliver. Balch Springs, Texas, April 2017. On the evening of April 29, 2017, a group of teenagers attended a house party in Balch Springs, Texas. Among them was 15-year-old Jordan Edwards, described by his principal as always smiling, by his football coach as a coach's dream, and by everyone who knew him as a young man with genuine ambition and a bright future ahead. Around 11 p.m., someone in the neighborhood called 911 reporting underage drinking. Officers Roy Oliver and his partner Tyler Gross responded. They entered the residence to locate the homeowner. While inside, they heard what they believed were gunshots outside, which caused panic among the party's attendees. Jordan Edwards, his older brother, and their companions got into their car to leave. Jordan's brother was driving. Officer Gross approached the vehicle and broke the passenger side window attempting to stop it. Officer Oliver retrieved his patrol rifle. He fired multiple rounds into the moving vehicle. Jordan Edwards was struck in the head. He was rushed to a nearby hospital and pronounced dead. In the immediate aftermath, the Balch Springs Police Department released a statement claiming that the vehicle had been reversing aggressively toward the officers, presenting a threat that justified lethal force. Body camera footage released in the following days showed something different. The car was moving away from the officers, not toward them. The stated justification for the use of lethal force was contradicted by the department's own footage. Oliver was placed on administrative leave and then fired. The footage contradiction led the Dallas Police Department to conduct an independent investigation. A warrant was issued for Oliver's arrest. He turned himself in and made bail at $300,000. The case that followed marked a rare instance in Texas legal history. A police officer charged with murder for an on-duty shooting in Dallas County. At trial in August 2018, Jordan Edwards' family and friends described him as a beacon of positivity. A 15-year-old who was already thinking about life beyond his hometown and working toward it. His football coach described the loss as one that deprived not just the family, but the entire community, of something that would have mattered. The jury found Roy Oliver guilty of murder on August 28, 2018. The following day he was sentenced to 15 years in prison, a sentence prosecutors had argued should be 60 years. The conviction was the first murder conviction of a police officer in Dallas County in over 40 years. As of April 2025, Oliver has served approximately 6.5 years of his 15-year sentence. He is incarcerated at the James V. Allred Unit in Iowa Park, Texas. Given the sentence structure, there is a possibility of release after serving the required portion. Case 14. Marcus Eberhart. East Point, Georgia, April 2014. On April 11, 2014, former East Point Police Sergeant Marcus Eberhart and his partner, Corporal Howard Williams, responded to a domestic disturbance call. When they arrived, they encountered 24-year-old Gregory Towns outside his girlfriend's residence. Towns, seeing the officers, ran. He was apprehended, handcuffed, and ordered to walk to the patrol vehicle. Towns was overweight and had underlying health conditions. After running from the officers, he was physically exhausted and struggling. He could not maintain the pace the officers demanded. The officers' response was to use their tasers on him. They used their tasers on him 14 times over a 30-minute period. Gregory Towns was handcuffed and unarmed throughout. Between taser deployments, he begged them to stop, telling them repeatedly that he needed to catch his breath. They did not stop. Towns eventually became unresponsive. When paramedics arrived, he was pronounced dead at the scene. The autopsy found that Towns died from hypertensive cardiovascular disease, exacerbated by physical exertion and repeated electrical stimulation. The medical finding placed the taser use, particularly the repeated application in drive-stun mode, as a significant contributing factor in his death. Towns's girlfriend later said publicly that she regretted calling the police that day, and that she would never place her trust in the police department or the court system again. At trial in December 2016, Eberhart was convicted of felony murder, aggravated assault, and violation of oath by a public officer. He was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 30 years. His partner, Corporal Howard Williams, was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, reckless conduct, and violation of oath. He expressed deep remorse during the proceedings and received a 5-year sentence with 18 months to serve, the remainder on probation, under first offender status. The city of East Point settled a civil lawsuit brought by Towns's family for $1 million, the maximum permitted under the city's insurance policy. As of April 2025, Eberhart has served approximately 8 years and 4 months of his sentence in a Georgia State Correctional Facility. Case 15. Derek Chauvin. Minneapolis, Minnesota, May 2020. On May 25, 2020, a bystander's phone captured footage that would be seen by hundreds of millions of people and would trigger one of the largest protest movements in American history. The footage showed Derek Chauvin, a 45-year-old Minneapolis Police Department officer with over 19 years of service and 18 prior complaints on his record, kneeling on the neck of George Floyd, a 46-year-old black man, while Floyd was handcuffed and lying face down on a Minneapolis street. Floyd said, repeatedly, that he could not breathe. He called for his mother. He stopped moving. Chauvin maintained his knee on Floyd's neck for over 9 minutes. The events that brought Chauvin and 3 other officers to that intersection began with a call from a Cup Foods grocery store employee who suspected Floyd had used a counterfeit $20 bill. Officers arrived, found Floyd in a nearby vehicle, and removed him from the car. The CCTV footage did not show Floyd actively resisting arrest. What the bystander footage showed, footage taken from multiple angles and released in the hours following the incident, was Chauvin maintaining pressure on Floyd's neck as Floyd's protests weakened and then stopped. 2 other officers assisted in the restraint. A 4th officer prevented bystanders from intervening. Floyd was transported to Hennepin County Medical Center, where he was pronounced dead. The autopsy determined that death resulted from cardiopulmonary arrest due to subdural restraint and compression of the neck. The footage spread globally within hours. Chauvin was arrested 4 days after Floyd's death. His 3 fellow officers were also charged. The trial began in March 2021 and concluded in April. After more than 10 hours of deliberation, the jury found Chauvin guilty on all 3 counts: second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. In June 2021, Judge Peter Cahill sentenced Chauvin to 22.5 years in prison, citing his abuse of authority and the particular cruelty demonstrated in the sustained use of force against a restrained and non-resistant man. Chauvin subsequently pleaded guilty to separate federal civil rights charges. In July 2022, a federal judge sentenced him to an additional 21 years to run concurrently with his state sentence. Following his transfer to federal custody at a facility in Tucson, Arizona, Chauvin was attacked and stabbed 22 times by a fellow inmate. He survived. He was subsequently transferred to a lower-security federal facility in Big Spring, Texas. George Floyd's family received a $27 million settlement from the city of Minneapolis to resolve a wrongful death lawsuit. As of April 2025, Chauvin has served nearly 4 years of his sentence. Given the concurrent nature of the state and federal sentences, he is projected to be released in 2037 at age 61, absent any changes in sentence or custody status. The 3 other officers present at the scene, Tu Tao, J. Alexander Kuang and Thomas Lane, were also convicted on federal civil rights charges and received separate sentences. Case 16. Nouman Raja, Palm Beach Gardens, Florida, October 2015. Corey Jones was 31 years old. He was a housing inspector, a church drummer at the Bible Church of God in Boynton Beach, and a performing member of the Future President's Band. On the night of October 18, 2015, he had been performing at a gig in Jupiter, Florida, and was driving home when his car broke down on an off-ramp of Interstate 95. He called friends and family. His brother offered to come get him, but Jones declined. He needed his car the next morning for a church engagement. His bandmate came out to help. They couldn't get it running. The bandmate left. Jones called a tow truck and waited on the phone with the roadside assistance line. At approximately 3:15 a.m., an unmarked van pulled up. The driver was Nouman Raja, a 38-year-old officer who had joined the Palm Beach Gardens Police Department several months earlier after serving with a different department. Raja was conducting plainclothes surveillance. He was not in uniform. His vehicle had no markings. He was not wearing a body camera, and the van had no dash cam. Raja approached Jones's disabled vehicle without identifying himself as a law enforcement officer. According to the audio recording captured by Jones's active phone call to roadside assistance, a recording that captured everything that happened that night, Raja asked Jones if he was good. Jones said yes. Then, within seconds, multiple gunshots were heard. Jones had a legally owned firearm, purchased for personal protection. He was holding it when he was shot. He ran. Raja fired 3 more shots. The last 3 struck Jones. He died at the scene. Raja's immediate account to investigators was self-defense. He claimed Jones had pointed the firearm at him. The audio recording of the roadside assistance call was released to the public in January 2017. It contradicted Raja's account. It also confirmed that Raja made a 911 call after the shooting, not before, directly contradicting his claim that he had called 911 before firing. Forensic evidence was equally damaging to the self-defense claim. Jones's firearm was found at the scene, undischarged. Forensic analysis indicated that Jones had been attempting to flee and was shot from behind. Raja was charged with manslaughter by culpable negligence and attempted first-degree murder. During the trial in March 2019, his defense maintained the self-defense position. The jury did not accept it. On March 7, 2019, after an 8-day trial, Raja was convicted on both counts. On April 25, 2019, he was sentenced to 25 years on each charge to run concurrently. The conviction marked the first time a Florida police officer had been convicted for an on-duty shooting in more than 30 years. Raja is incarcerated at the Wakulla Correctional Institution in Crawfordville, Florida. As of April 2025, he has served 6 years of his sentence and is scheduled for parole consideration in 2044 when he will be 63 years old. Case 17. Andrew Gwynn, Silver Plume, Colorado, June 2022. On the evening of June 10, 2022, 22-year-old Christian Glass was driving alone near Silver Plume, Colorado, when his car went off the road and became stuck in dirt. He called 911 for help. On the 911 call, Glass displayed signs of acute mental distress. He told the operator he was frightened and asked her to stay on the line with him. He expressed fear about skinwalkers, a reference that reflected the disorganized thinking of someone in a mental health crisis. He said he was scared and would not be okay on his own. When officers arrived, including Deputy Andrew Bryant of the Clear Creek County Sheriff's Office, they asked Glass to exit the vehicle with their hands on their weapons. Glass refused, saying the car was the only place he felt safe. Glass told the officers he had a geology knife in the car. He offered to throw it out the window. They told him not to. He kept it, and kept his hands visible. He was later recorded praying in the car, and making a heart shape with his hands toward the officers outside. Over the course of approximately 70 minutes, officers attempted various approaches to get Glass out of the vehicle. None worked. As the situation extended, Gwen smashed the front window of the car. An officer climbed onto the roof and shone a flashlight through the broken window. A taser was deployed. Then Gwen opened fire with his handgun. Christian Glass was shot at least 5 times. He died at the scene. The department's initial statement described Glass as argumentative and uncooperative, and claimed he had been attempting to stab an officer with the knife. The body camera footage told a different story. Among the images captured, Glass making a heart with his hands from inside the car in the moments before he was shot. The footage was not released publicly for several months after the incident. When it was, the Glass family and the broader public saw the 70-minute sequence in full. Gwen was charged with second-degree murder and official misconduct. In his first trial in 2024, the jury convicted him on a misdemeanor reckless endangerment charge, but could not reach a verdict on the more serious counts. A retrial in 2025 resulted in a conviction for criminally negligent homicide. At sentencing, Gwen expressed remorse directly. He said Christian had deserved better and that he was sorry. His mother addressed the court, asking for mercy. The Glass family did not accept the remorse speech. They had watched the body camera footage. They had seen the heart their son made with his hands. The judge sentenced Gwen to 3 years in prison. He was terminated from the sheriff's office following his indictment. The Glass family reached a $19 million settlement with local authorities. The settlement included commitments to reform how the county responds to mental health crises. As of April 2025, Gwen has served approximately 2 months of his sentence, leaving approximately 2 years and 10 months to serve in a Colorado state prison. Case 18. Michael Valva and Angela Polina, revisited. Center Moriches, Long Island, New York. The wider context. We open this episode with Thomas Valva, and we return to his case, not to repeat the facts, but to sit with a dimension of it that the case summary alone does not fully convey. Thomas and his brother Anthony had been in school every day. They had teachers, aides, school staff, and administrators who saw them regularly. Multiple school officials testified at trial that both boys arrived at school cold, hungry, in soiled clothing, almost every day, that they were observed scavenging for food, that the signs of their neglect were visible, consistent, and documented. The question that does not resolve cleanly is this: at what point did those observations become reports? At what point did reports generate investigations? And at what point did investigations produce action? The trial record established that school staff had concerns, and that some of those concerns were communicated. What the case also established is that Thomas Valva died of hypothermia on a January morning in 2020, after a night on a cement garage floor, in a household where his father's professional background as a former NYPD officer may have provided a layer of credibility that slowed the institutional response. He was 8 years old. His case is the one on this list that most directly raises the question of what happens when the people who are supposed to protect children do not act with the urgency the situation requires, and when the presence of a law enforcement background in an abusive household creates additional complexity for the systems designed to intervene. Thomas was nonverbal in some respects due to his autism, which limited his ability to communicate his situation to teachers, counselors, or officials who might have intervened. His brother Anthony survived, but the experiences he lived through in that garage are permanent. The Suffolk County verdict and the 25 to life sentences for both Valva and Polina were the justice system's answer to what happened to Thomas. They are the only answers the system had to offer. Thomas Valva would have been 13 years old in 2025. 18 cases. 18 individuals who wore a law enforcement uniform, or carried law enforcement credentials at the time of their crimes, or whose crimes were directly connected to their law enforcement careers. Some of them killed people they knew. Some killed strangers. Some killed in the context of domestic disputes. Some used their badges to select and control victims. Some acted in official capacity and used lethal force that the evidence said was unjustified. One used a police warrant card to abduct a woman walking home. The range of what these cases represent is wide. The on-duty shooting cases, Chauvin, Oliver, Raja, Dean, Buen, Eberhart, raise different legal and systemic questions than the cases involving off-duty criminal violence. The predatory cases, Holtzclaw, Couzens, Carrick, are different in kind from the domestic homicides, Cuts, Kinne, Blue. The child abuse case, Valva, is different from all of them. What they share is the badge. What they share is the trust that came with it. And what they share is the betrayal of that trust, through deliberate violence, through predatory targeting, through the use of credentials to commit crimes, or through the kind of catastrophic failure of judgment that left a teenager dead in the back seat of a moving car. These cases are not arguments against law enforcement. Most officers serve without ever coming close to any of the conduct documented in these 18 cases. The vast majority of police interactions involve people trying to do a difficult job well. But these cases are arguments for the sustained, honest, and rigorous functioning of the accountability systems that are supposed to catch and remove the exceptions. The systems failed in the Couzens case, 9 incidents on record before Sarah Everard. They failed in the Carrick case, 17 years, 9 complaints, no meaningful action. They failed in the Holtzclaw case long enough for 16 women to be targeted before one of them walked into a police station and refused to be turned away. When accountability works, when footage contradicts false narratives, when convictions follow on-duty killings, when predatory officers face trial, it is because someone, somewhere, decided to look at the evidence and follow it wherever it led. These 18 cases are the record of what happens when that process runs its full course. They are also the record of how long it sometimes takes to get there. 18 cases, 150 minutes. If you made it to the end of this one, thank you. Genuinely, this episode covers a wide range of cases. Some you may have known well, some you may be hearing for the first time in this level of detail. That's what this channel is for. Daily Crime Archive is new, and your subscription matters in a direct, concrete way. Hit subscribe if you haven't. Turn on the bell and drop a comment. Tell us which of these 18 cases you followed when it was in the news, and which one you think deserves its own full dedicated episode. Check the pinned comment below for the complete current status of every person covered today, where they are, what they're serving, and what the outcomes of every case look like as of 2025. We'll see you in the next one.